The last few months have felt like a storm no one could escape. Accusations flying in every direction, speculation turning into wildfire, and a vulnerable family caught in the middle of noise they never asked for. For many supporters, it felt like the Whitakers' world was collapsing piece by piece. People were angry, confused, frustrated, and desperately searching for answers that never seemed to come. And then, just as the story felt like it was sinking deeper into chaos, something unexpected happened. Something good. Something uplifting. Something that reminded everyone why they cared in the first place. For the first time in a long while, supporters woke up to a piece of news they could actually smile about. Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray are safe, well cared for, and, according to the latest reports, showing real signs of improvement. And not improvement in a vague, they're doing okay, sort of way. The kind of improvement that makes people cry happy tears when they hear it. The kind that brings relief, joy, and hope all at once. This update didn't come from the usual online chaos. It didn't come from rumors or secondhand screenshots. It came from someone who actually reached out to the right department and finally got a clear answer. And that clarity has changed the tone of the entire conversation. For months, supporters feared the worst. Everyone had imagined Timmy isolated, confused, or upset, Lorraine scared and lonely, Ray struggling without the comfort of familiar faces. But now, the picture looks completely different. The reports describe them as comfortable, medically stable, emotionally supported, and surrounded by professionals who actually understand their needs. For the first time in weeks, people felt their shoulders drop. The tension eased. The fear softened. Because this update didn't sound like a tragedy unfolding. It sounded like healing. It sounded like hope. But the good news didn't stop there. There's now talk of something supporters thought might never happen again, visitation being considered. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But discussions are happening, doors are opening, and the idea of loved ones being reunited doesn't feel like an impossible dream anymore. And this is what created the emotional reaction across social media. The idea that Betty, who has been aching for her family, may finally be able to see them. That alone was enough to bring many longtime followers to tears. The thought of her walking into that room, seeing her sister and nephew again, hearing their voices, it's overwhelming in the best way possible. After everything they've been through, after all the exploitation, all the fighting, all the chaos created around them, this small piece of good news felt like a miracle. Still, the emotional impact isn't just about their safety. It's also about what this update proves. It proves that people cared enough to make real calls. It proves that the system, at least for now, is protecting them. It proves that despite all the bad actors, the people who truly support this family never stopped pushing for answers. But the heartwarming part goes deeper. It turns out Timmy has been responding incredibly well to the structure and consistency of professional care. Many supporters don't realize how much stress and instability he had been living around. Constant filming, sudden guests, unpredictable schedules, people showing up at the property unannounced. The kind of overstimulation that may seem small to most of us but can be overwhelming for someone like Timmy. But he's calm. He's comfortable. He's thriving in a routine. One of the most emotional details shared by those close to the situation is that Timmy has begun smiling again. Real smiles. Not the tense, uncertain expressions people saw in many online videos, but the soft, relaxed smiles of someone who feels safe and understood. For Lorraine, it's much the same. Having access to steady meals, regulated medication, and medical oversight has already made a significant difference in her day-to-day well-being. People forget how long this family lived without reliable medical support. Even simple checkups were rare. But now, she's getting exactly what she needs. And Ray? He reportedly adjusted quicker than anyone expected. Caring staff, stable sleep patterns, and being away from the stress of cameras and constant outside attention seems to have allowed him to relax in a way supporters haven't seen in years. This is why people cried when they heard the news. Because despite the drama, despite the rumors, despite everything falling apart online, the three people at the center of this story are finally getting what they've needed all along: peace. Of course, with good news comes new questions. Who is responsible for stepping in and making sure they were placed somewhere safe? Why did it take so long? Why wasn't this clarity given sooner to the people supporting them? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for their future? That last question is what's starting to build a whole new conversation. Some think the state stepping in is temporary, a stabilizing measure until long-term decisions are made. Some believe reunification with Betty is possible, but only if certain conditions are met. Others think a long-term care setting may be the only way to guarantee their safety. But there's another side to this conversation too, one filled with anger toward the people who contributed to the chaos in the first place. Because now that the dust is finally settling, the finger-pointing has become much clearer. Supporters are beginning to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. The non-stop filming, live streaming, and online drama created by outside parties didn't help the Whitakers. It harmed them. And while some people online claimed to be their protectors, the truth is that the Whitaker family became a battleground for personal gain. Patrick and Eric's feud overshadowed the family's real needs. Their online war created confusion, stress, and uncertainty at the worst possible time. Both sides insisted they were acting out of love, concern, or loyalty, but the results tell a different story. Lives were affected, stability was shattered, and a family became entertainment for people who should have been advocating for them instead. And yet, today, none of that seems as important. Because the update that matters, the one supporters have been praying for, is simple. Timmy is okay. Lorraine is okay. Ray is okay. They are safe. They are cared for. They are healing. Those truths overshadow the chaos. They quiet the noise. They bring relief that supporters desperately needed. Still, the emotions are mixed. Many cried out of joy, yes, but also out of guilt. Out of reflection. Out of sadness that things had to reach a crisis before real help arrived. But the overwhelming feeling today is gratitude. Gratitude that someone made the call. Gratitude that the system finally stepped in. Gratitude that, despite everything, there is still a path forward for this family. And gratitude that supporters who genuinely care never gave up. This update isn't the end of the story, far from it. But it's a turning point. A hopeful one. A healing one. It's the first moment in months where people feel like they can breathe again. It's the kind of news that brings people together instead of pulling them apart. And most of all, it's the kind of news the Whitakers deserved all along. Comment below. Let me know below what part of this update moved you the most, and whether you believe reunification is still possible for this family. Hey everyone, before we get into the next part, I've got something special to share with you. If you're all about making your home smarter, cozier, and just a little bit more you, then you've got to check this out. We've partnered with Trekbo.com, a place built for people who love clever solutions and everyday comfort. From wellness and skincare must-haves to smart home gadgets, heated gear, and lifestyle tech, Trekbo is packed with products that make life easier, warmer, and way more fun. I've personally picked some of my favorite finds, things that actually work, look great, and make your day smoother. Whether it's something to simplify your morning routine, help you unwind after a long day, or bring a little innovation into your home, you'll find it there. So before you scroll past, take a quick look at Trekbo.com. Trust me, it's full of discoveries waiting to make your everyday better. Alright, now let's get back to it. Because after this video, you're definitely going to want to explore what Trekbo has in store for the Whitaker household community. The moment the positive update about Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray began circulating, something remarkable happened. For months, every discussion around the Whitakers had felt heavy, tense, and filled with frustration. But now, the tone shifted. The atmosphere softened. The community that had been divided, doubtful, and exhausted finally had a reason to feel hopeful again. But hope doesn't erase the questions that have been building for months. And if anything, this new update has brought even more of them to the surface. People want to know what changed. They want to know why things suddenly look better. They want to understand how a story that had spiraled into chaos somehow reached a point where real care is finally being given to the members of the family who needed it most. And it all begins with what supporters have suspected for weeks. The state stepped in because the situation was no longer safe. Some people still try to deny this, still try to argue that outside intervention wasn't necessary, that everything was fine before. But deep down, anyone who followed this story closely knows the truth. The environment had become unstable, unpredictable, and harmful. Not because of the Whitakers themselves. Not because of their disabilities. Not because of their lifestyle. But because too many people were using them as props, content, or stepping stones. That reality is uncomfortable, but ignoring it would be dishonest. For months, supporters watched content creators compete over who knew the family better, who had access to them, who had the right to speak for them, who was more genuine, who was more loyal. People made channels, built audiences, earned money, and used the Whitakers' names as leverage. And the Whitakers, especially the most vulnerable members, became stuck in the crossfire. The truth is painful, but it's necessary. The Whitakers didn't need more cameras. They didn't need more promises. They didn't need more online feuds. They needed medical care, stability, protection, and peace. Which is why, ironically, the very thing that so many people feared, state intervention, may be the only reason they are safe today. While supporters waited, while YouTubers fought, while accusations flew, the state quietly did the one thing no one else was willing or able to do: provide consistent, structured, professional care. But the most emotional part of this entire situation isn't the intervention itself. It's what happened after the intervention. Because according to the update that sparked this wave of joy, the three of them aren't just surviving. They're thriving. People who have worked with vulnerable adults for years are saying that the progress seen in such a short time is extraordinary. Timmy's increased calmness. Lorraine's improved stability. Ray's comfort and connection with caregivers. It's the kind of development that can only happen when stress is removed and proper support is put in place. For many supporters, it's been bittersweet to accept that the best thing for them wasn't found in their old environment but in the care of professionals. But acceptance doesn't diminish the relief. And relief doesn't erase the deep emotional reaction people had when they learned the three were doing well. Still, the big question hangs in the air. Where does this leave Betty? For decades, she has been at the center of this family, cooking for them, caring for them, waking up early to help them, worrying about them, and carrying burdens most people couldn't handle for a single day. Supporters feel the ache in every clip of her talking about missing her family. They hear it in her voice, see it in her expressions, feel it in every sigh and every moment she sits quietly waiting for updates that never came fast enough. Betty wasn't perfect. No caregiver is. But she loved them fiercely. So what happens now? According to those who reached out to DHR, something important is taking place. Discussions about possible visitation. It's not confirmed. It's not scheduled. But it's being discussed, and in situations like this, that alone is a major step forward. Reunification, in any form, always begins with supervised visits. Small steps. Observations. Evaluations. And those steps can only happen after professionals determine that the environment is safe, stable, and appropriate. This doesn't mean Betty will be cut off forever. It doesn't mean the family is broken. It doesn't mean reunification is impossible. It simply means the state wants to ensure the well-being of all three individuals before anything else happens. And that's what has the community divided, not in anger, but in emotion. On one hand, people want them together again. They want Betty to hug her sister. They want her to hold Timmy's hand. They want Ray to hear her voice and calm down the way he always did. But on the other hand, people now understand something they didn't fully grasp before. The old environment was failing them. Not because Betty didn't love them, but because the people coming in and out of their lives created instability that Betty had no way to control. Filming schedules. Visitors. Online chaos. Constant stimulation. Pressure from outsiders. Promises from people who didn't follow through. Betty did her best, but she didn't stand a chance against the wave of attention that hit their household. And she shouldn't be blamed for the actions of people who used the family for content. Which brings us to the emotional core of part 2. The healing that Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray are experiencing right now would not have been possible without removing them from the chaos. And even supporters who were initially against state intervention are now quietly admitting they're grateful it happened. Because the truth is, love alone doesn't replace medical care. Love alone doesn't repair stress. Love alone doesn't restore stability. But love combined with the right support? That can change everything. And that's the journey supporters want to see now. A path that brings the family back together the right way, at the right time, under the right conditions. But while the family is beginning to heal, the online community surrounding them is still trying to sort through the mess left behind. Patrick and Eric's feud continues to overshadow the real story. Each of them claims they wanted what was best for the family, but the results show something very different. Accusations, delays, excuses, and shifts in blame have done nothing but fracture the community further. Supporters who once stood firmly behind one or the other are now stepping back, saying they want no part in the feud. People want clarity, not drama. They want accountability, not finger-pointing. The emotional reaction isn't just about the Whitakers, it's about betrayal. The betrayal of trust. The misuse of influence. The manipulation of a narrative involving vulnerable people. But now, for the first time in a long time, the focus is shifting back where it always should have been, on the well-being of the family. And that's what makes this part of the story so important. The supporters who fought for answers, who made calls, who kept pushing, those are the people who helped this shift happen. The ones who didn't care about views or subscribers. The ones who didn't try to insert themselves into the story to gain attention. The ones who simply wanted the family to be safe. They are the reason this update exists. They are the reason this news brings tears of joy. Because when everything felt lost, they didn't give up. Now, the next question is how to move forward without repeating the mistakes of the past. How to support the family without overwhelming them. How to advocate for them without crossing boundaries. How to ensure that reunification, when it happens, is built on stability, not chaos. But for now, the community is allowing itself a moment of peace. A moment of gratitude. A moment of joy. Because hearing that the three most vulnerable members of the Whitaker family are smiling, safe, and thriving is something supporters will remember for a long time. And it's only the beginning. Comment below. Share your thoughts below. Should visitation happen sooner rather than later, or should the state wait until the family's progress is fully stabilized? As the news spread that Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray were finally safe, stable, and receiving proper care, a second wave of emotions swept through the community, one that blended joy with frustration, relief with confusion, and gratitude with a renewed sense of urgency. Because while it's comforting to know they are thriving, supporters still feel a deep responsibility to understand how things reached this point in the first place. And even more importantly, what's going to happen next. The picture that's emerging, slowly, and with careful verification, is more complex than anyone expected. And the deeper supporters dig, the clearer it becomes that this situation didn't happen overnight. It wasn't triggered by one video, one mistake, one feud, or one outside influence. It was the result of a long buildup of stress, neglect, and instability that was never properly acknowledged, not by the state, not by content creators, and not by the people who swore they had the Whitakers' best interests at heart. But while the history is complicated, the present moment offers something rare in this story: clarity. The three of them are doing better than anyone anticipated. And that is not an accident. It's the result of structured routines, healthy meals, medication management, predictable schedules, emotional support, medical evaluations, supervised daily activities, and a stable environment free from pressure, cameras, and chaos. Some supporters have asked, were they neglected before? Others asked, was someone preventing them from getting proper care? And many wondered, if they were doing so poorly, why didn't anyone intervene sooner? The reality is harsh but necessary to acknowledge. Their environment had reached a level where intervention became unavoidable. And the heartbreaking part? It wasn't just their surroundings. It was the people influencing their lives from the outside, the ones who visited with cameras, who fed them sugar for reactions, who filmed their struggles, who posted without thinking about consequences, who treated them like characters instead of people. Some outsiders saw their disabilities as content. Others saw their vulnerability as an opportunity. Too many saw their trust as a doorway into fame or money. And even those who meant well, those who truly cared, were often too inexperienced to understand how delicate their situation was. That's why Part 3 focuses on something supporters have been whispering about for weeks: the emotional impact this instability had on Betty. Because if there's anyone who has been carrying the weight of this tragedy more than anyone else, it's her. Betty has lived her entire life protecting, feeding, caring for, and nurturing her siblings. She did this without resources, without support, without training, and without the luxury of rest. She did it out of love. And when the world discovered the Whitakers, Betty suddenly found herself thrust into a spotlight she never asked for. One day she was cooking beans on a stove, managing medications, helping her siblings with mobility and hygiene, and the next day she had strangers driving up her holler trying to take pictures, drones flying over the roof, and YouTubers showing up unannounced. She didn't have the tools to filter who was trustworthy and who wasn't. She didn't know how to navigate internet culture or online manipulation. She didn't understand how quickly people can turn from helpers to opportunists. And worst of all, she didn't know how to stop it. Because for the first time in years, people were offering her help, real help, in the form of food, heat, clothes, and attention. Rejecting that help would have meant rejecting the only support the family had interacted with in decades. She was stuck, overwhelmed, exhausted, and silently suffering. Her siblings depended on her. The public watched her. Creators pressured her. Supporters begged for updates. The hollers stayed crowded. The environment became unpredictable. And then the situation spiraled. And the people who were supposed to protect her, the ones who had platforms, influence, and power, were too busy arguing with each other. The feud between Eric and Patrick left her caught in the middle. The lies, the accusations, the manipulation, the disinformation, all of it chipped away at what little stability she had left. She didn't know who to trust. She didn't know which version of events was real. She didn't know that every disagreement online was making things worse for her siblings. And while all this chaos was happening, the state was quietly watching from a distance. They didn't step in because of YouTube, not solely. They stepped in because the videos exposed a reality that was impossible to ignore. No single caregiver could manage the level of need in that home alone. And Betty shouldn't have been expected to. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't neglect. It was simply too much for one aging woman to handle. Which brings us to the most emotional question supporters have been asking. Does Betty know how much better they are doing? According to people close to the situation, she knows they are safe. She knows they are receiving care. She knows they are eating well, sleeping well, and being checked by professionals. But what she doesn't know, and what supporters are afraid to tell her, is just how much they've improved. Because how do you tell a woman who devoted her entire life to protecting her siblings that their health improved the moment she wasn't their sole caregiver anymore? How do you explain that she wasn't enough, even though she gave everything she had? How do you comfort a woman who believes she failed, when the truth is that the system failed her long before she ever failed anyone? Supporters want her to know the positive news. They want her to feel comforted, not replaced. They want her to understand that her role is still important, maybe more important than ever. And they want her to be able to see them again. Not because she has to prove anything. Not because she needs validation. But because a reunion would heal something deep in her heart that has been hurting ever since the day they were taken. Which begs another critical question: when will she be allowed to visit? Experts familiar with these situations say visitation comes after the safety assessment, medical stabilization, behavioral observation, documentation review, family consultation, and consistency from the primary caregiver. 3 of those steps have already reportedly been completed. 2 are underway. 1 depends entirely on Betty's environment and readiness. But here's the part that touched the community the most. Even though visits haven't happened yet, the staff caring for Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray have reportedly used pictures, familiar objects, and sensory cues to help them feel connected to home. They've shown them photos of Betty. They've played sounds they recognize. They've kept routines similar when possible. They've maintained consistency in language and tone. They've created a safe emotional bridge. That level of compassionate care has moved supporters to tears because it proves something vital. The caregivers truly see them as human beings, not as cases, not as burdens, and definitely not as content. And that's why Part 3 carries such emotional weight. Because while the community waits for reunification, while Betty waits for answers, while supporters wait for updates, Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray are experiencing something they haven't had in years. Safety, structure, medical support, emotional calm, and a life free from exploitation. Supporters have begun to say something they never expected to admit. This might be the best thing that ever happened for them. Not because the family was broken, not because Betty failed, but because the world failed them long before any YouTuber discovered them. And the state finally stepped in when everyone else was too busy feuding online. Which leads to a powerful realization that supporters have begun to express out loud. The goal shouldn't be to return everything to the way it was. The goal should be to return everything to a safer, healthier, more supported version of what it was. A version where Betty gets help. A version where the siblings get consistent care. A version where outsiders don't exploit them. A version where no one can manipulate the narrative for personal gain. A version where love and proper care work hand in hand, not against each other. That's the future supporters want for them. And maybe, just maybe, that's the future they're finally headed toward. Comment below. Do you believe Betty should be part of the care plan moving forward? Or should professionals handle most of the responsibility? Share your thoughts below. As the story moved into its newest chapter, the mood in the community shifted from heartbreak to a cautious, overwhelming hope. Supporters who had followed every twist and turn, from the confusion, the feuds, the accusations, and the heartbreak, were finally seeing something they had been praying for. Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray were not only safe, not only stable, but thriving in ways many thought were impossible. But Part 4 isn't just about where they are now. It's about where they might be heading next. And for the first time in months, the future feels brighter than the past. The latest update coming through people close to the situation paints a picture that made even the toughest supporters emotional. Timmy has been smiling more. Lorraine has been calmer and more engaged. Ray has been responding to familiar gestures and voices. These small milestones might sound ordinary to people who haven't followed the Whitakers closely. But to those who have watched every video, every clip, every photograph, these changes feel miraculous. These improvements didn't happen through luck. They happened through structure, professional care, and consistency. Every day begins at the same time. Meals come at predictable intervals. Medication schedules are regulated by professionals. Sensory activities are planned carefully. Emotional interactions are monitored to prevent overstimulation. For the first time in their lives, they are receiving the kind of care people with similar disabilities often receive much earlier, sometimes from childhood. That's what makes this progress both beautiful and heartbreaking. It shows how much they needed support, and it shows how hard Betty tried, even when the situation was too big for one person to handle. Supporters have described this update as bittersweet, because while they are relieved to see progress, they also feel the heavy emotional weight behind it. The truth is simple. The Whitakers never lacked love. They lacked resources. They lacked guidance. They lacked a safety net. And now that they have one, their lives are changing quickly. But with every good piece of news, new questions rise to the surface, questions that supporters have been discussing for weeks. The first major question: when will reunification begin? Not full reunification. Not everyone moving back home. But a slow, carefully guided reintroduction, starting with supervised visits, emotional assessments, and controlled interactions. From what people familiar with the case are saying, reunification isn't off the table. In fact, the progress the siblings have made makes it more likely, not less. But there are conditions. Professionals need to ensure that visits won't send them backward. Betty must be emotionally ready. The environment must be stable. The caregivers must coordinate. It's a delicate process, not because anyone doubts Betty's love, but because trauma doesn't come only from abuse or neglect. It also comes from instability, sudden changes, and confusion. And after everything they've lived through, the number one priority is protecting their emotional and psychological progress. The second question supporters keep asking: are Patrick or Eric involved in any part of this care? The answer appears to be no, and supporters are increasingly relieved about that. Neither man is influencing the care plan. Neither man is controlling communication with the state. Neither man is dictating decisions or outcomes. This reveals something important. For the first time in a long time, the Whitakers are not being used as leverage in someone else's feud. Their well-being stands separate from YouTube drama, separate from competing narratives, separate from people trying to build platforms off their struggles. And the community has responded with overwhelming gratitude. Without Patrick inserting himself, without Eric attempting control, without outside interference, the caregivers have been able to focus solely on the three individuals who matter most. This leads to the third question: how does Betty fit into the long-term picture? And the answer, while still evolving, is becoming clearer. Betty is not being shut out. She is not being punished. She is not being replaced. Professionals understand something many internet commentators do not. Family is powerful. Family is grounding. Family is familiar. Family is emotional safety, even in complicated situations. But caregivers also know that stability has to come first. That means Betty may eventually be part of a shared care plan, where professionals handle the heavy tasks, medical responsibilities, and daily structure, while Betty contributes in emotional and relational ways. The goal isn't to remove her from their lives. The goal is to support her so she isn't carrying an impossible burden alone. Supporters have already started imagining what that future could look like. Betty visiting weekly or bi-weekly. Staff helping with transportation. Scheduled days where she can bring familiar food. Caregivers guiding conversations and interactions. The possibility of supervised outdoor walks. Maybe even holiday gatherings in moderated environments. These are realistic possibilities, not fantasies, as long as stability continues. The fourth question supporters keep raising: what happens to the home? This has been the most emotional question of all because the house represents something deeper, a lifetime of memories, both good and difficult. Some people have suggested the home should be renovated, updated, cleaned, and made safe again. Others believe the environment has too much emotional weight and may trigger stress for the siblings. And some are convinced the home should become a place for occasional visits, not permanent residence. But one thing is certain: nothing will be done until every professional involved believes it serves the siblings' best interests. No creator, no outsider, no person with a camera or a channel. None of them will be in charge of the decision. That alone brings supporters comfort. The fifth question emerging from recent discussions is one that few want to ask, but many feel they need to. What if the state becomes their permanent guardian? For decades, Betty was everything: caregiver, protector, nurse, advocate, emotional anchor. But as the siblings age, their needs increase, not decrease. Professional guardianship doesn't mean they will never see Betty again. It doesn't mean they are being taken away forever. It doesn't mean someone else is taking over the family. It simply means they will have access to medical staff, behavior specialists, nutritionists, daily activity coordinators, 24/7 supervision, crisis support, structured environments. It means the burden isn't on one woman's shoulders anymore. And if reunification happens, it will be structured, not thrown together in chaos or desperation. Supporters understand this. Many have said that if guardianship is the safest long-term solution, then they accept it, not because they want to separate the family, but because they want to protect its most vulnerable members. But the most emotional part of this entire update came from what caregivers shared about the siblings' routines. It turns out they have been responding extremely well to small acts of familiarity. Timmy responds when he hears someone say, "Hey buddy." Lorraine reacts positively when she hears female voices speaking softly. Ray becomes calmer when someone gently rubs his arm the way Betty used to. These reactions have been deeply meaningful to the staff, proof that the siblings are emotionally connected, aware, and comforted by memories of home. And that is when the most heartwarming update of all surfaced. Caregivers are preparing for the possibility of a future visitation session. Nothing is scheduled. Nothing is confirmed. But the groundwork is being laid, carefully, quietly, respectfully. It won't be random. It won't be filmed. It won't be chaotic. It won't involve outsiders. It will be structured with professionals present to ensure emotional safety. And when it happens, whether in a month, 3 months, or longer, it will be a moment the entire community will celebrate. A reunion based on love, not pressure. Healing, not stress. Clarity, not confusion. Care, not exploitation. That is the future people are hoping for. That is the future these caregivers are working toward. And that is the future that feels closer today than it has ever been. Because now, for the first time, Timmy is smiling. Lorraine is calmer. Ray is stable. Betty is hopeful. The community is united. And the drama that once overshadowed everything is finally losing its power. This is not the ending of the Whitaker story. This is the first step toward a healthier beginning. Comment below. Do you think the first reunion should happen in a care facility or in a familiar environment like their home? Share your thoughts below. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.